the biggest threat to the country at the moment. Joining me now, Professor of Politics, Senior Fellow at the UK in a Changing Europe, Rob Ford. Rob, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us. I find all this deeply fascinating, what might happen. Let's just start with Reform UK. They make a lot of noise when people respond to, who do you think might make a difference to this country? Many people, certainly anecdotally, seem to say, well, I think Reform UK, they speak my language. But the Reform types of parties, I'm thinking UKIP in particular, I've never really had. They've won votes, I think 2015, if memory serves me correctly, done rather well, but not translated that into any big electoral success.
Well, it depends how you define electoral success, Ian, I think. They don't win seats. The only seat they ever got was a Conservative defector, but they got 14% of the vote. And most importantly, if you go back and look at what was on UKIP's agenda in 2013 to 14, the Conservatives adopted most of it, in particular, leaving the EU and fundamental reform to the immigration system. Nigel Farage remembers all of that very well, so he knows that the route to influence when you're a party like Reform UK is not through winning seats in the Commons, because their vote is too evenly spread across the country to achieve that. The route to influence is by putting pressure on the Conservative Party and thus getting them to adopt the kind of ideas that you want to see in politics. And that's exactly the playbook we're seeing them roll out in the last few days or so.
In terms of, let's talk about Nigel Farage. He's, whether people like him or not, he's a bit of a powerhouse. He's a very eloquent speaker, very persuasive, quite mesmeric, some might say. He knows his territory rather well, and he's darn good at selling it. Does Reform UK, where he's still, I think, honorary president or something like that, do they need him around to make some of those inroads?
Well, I think one of the most important questions for this next general election is, what will Nigel do? Because there is no doubt that his profile and stature with the public is just miles ahead of anybody else in that party. There's a huge chunk of the former UKIP electorate that regards him as their favourite politician, particularly now that Boris Johnson is a bit of a busted flush. So if he plays a high-profile role in the election campaign, then there's little doubt in my mind that will push the Reform UK vote up from where it would otherwise be. And many of those Reform UK voters are likely to be 2019 Conservative voters who are unhappy or disappointed with how this government has performed. So a bigger role for Nigel Farage means bigger worries for the Conservative Party.
Yeah. Of course, UKIP are still going. Despite not having quite the same profile as they once did. I could imagine some people might get confused on election day, still thinking in UKIP terms.
Well, I don't think that they're going to be standing in more than a handful of seats. I guess some people will see that and think, oh, that's Farage's party, I'll vote for them. So there'll be a little bit of that. As I mentioned, though, I don't think it's likely to affect Reform's prospects of winning seats, because I don't think they're going to win many seats. But it might reduce their vote total. And obviously they want as many votes as possible for sort of post-election bragging rights in terms of how many votes they've hauled in. But I forget the figures, but you're really down to very few places where they're even competing anymore. They're really a kind of declining rump outfit at this point.
In terms of Reform, back to them, the point that Lee Anderson was making, which I'm pretty sure most would agree, is that, in fact, it's Reform that are the bigger danger to the Conservatives, not really the Labour Party, if that makes sense.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with it in those terms. Obviously, the party that is the only party that is in a position to evict the Conservatives from Downing Street is the Labour Party. And every vote that goes directly from the Conservatives to Labour counts double towards that outcome. One less vote on the Conservative total, one more vote on the Labour total. What is undoubtedly clear, though, and this is where I think Lee Anderson does have a point, is that Reform UK are capable of taking votes from the Conservative Party that would be unlikely otherwise to go anywhere else. These are not voters that are liable to vote for the Labour Party, or in the south of England, voters that are liable to vote for the Liberal Democrats. So that pulls the Conservative voter total down and makes it easier for their opponents, Labour or the Liberal Democrats, to win. This is one of the big ironies of Reform UK, is that very often they're helping parties that are very different to them.
It's a fair point to finish on. Rob Ford, thank you for your time. We will speak again, I'm sure, sticking with this subject. Let's now talk